Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to Star Trek Prodigy, a ReBingeIt podcast. My name is James.
And my name is Kim, and we're watching and overanalyzing each episode of Star Trek Prodigy like true Star Trek geeks. Hit it! Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 1, Episode 16, Preludes. This episode began streaming on Paramount Plus December 1st, 2022. The Paramount Plus description is a Starfleet admiral digs into the past of the Protostar crew. Meanwhile, the diviner recalls his life's mission.
It's good that he gets purpose to his life.
Yeah, I protest the description that the admiral digs into the past of the Protostar crew. I mean, we get some of the past, but I don't think it's because the admiral was looking at a data pad.
That's true. Should we get started?
Of course.
We open with Vice Admiral Janeway in her ready room, listening to Chopin's Prelude No. 4. Commander Tysus is there, and she tells him about the thieves who have stolen the Protostar. We still have no idea who we're dealing with. Commander Tysus informs her he has found a non-Federation transmission with a bounty for the unwanted, and gives Janeway a pad with basically mugshots of the crew and their names.
If this was Star Trek in the 90s, he'd have come in with 6 separate data pads, one for each person.
Oh, that's true. That is something we have pointed out in Deep Space Nine. Multiple data pads for single things.
Yep. We can only have one story on one data pad.
Now, I don't know about you, but wouldn't your first question be, so who's putting out this bounty?
Yeah, I would absolutely think that's your first question, especially when you know they're kids.
Janeway asks the question again of why are they not answering their hails? And I'll point back to maybe Morse code or lights or a large sign.
Or send over a shuttle, something.
With a shuttle, I would question that might be the violation of the neutral zone and the treaty. So, but still, maybe you could send over a non-Federation ship.
An escape pod.
Yeah, with an off-duty member of Starfleet who's totally on vacation and not doing this in official capacity at all.
Yeah, exactly. I was really struck by the animation in this scene.
Yeah.
There is this wrinkle in Commander Tyce's uniform that is just so realistic.
Yeah.
And also Janeway's uniform has some wrinkles and like a little bulge or a fold in the fabric here and there. The imperfections are just totally cool in modern animation.
I do feel that the animation in this show varies quite a lot. You'll get some absolutely beautiful animation.
Yeah.
And other parts that feel like it's almost rushed, maybe?
Well, that might be a good definition. Maybe they have times where they are rushed just to get something out. The other thing that's funny in this scene is these sort of mugshots of the kids are very funny.
Yeah.
Like Dal has this snarl on his face like he's some kind of evil genius.
Clearly the ringleader.
Yeah. Now we go to the Protostar and Dal is trying to help fix things. And it's not going very well.
No.
And Jankom reminds him that the goal is to fix the warp drive, not destroy it.
Very helpful.
Dal is whining a bit about how this isn't his job, and Zero reminds him that as long as there's an admiral watching, it's everyone's job.
Yeah.
A little bit, honestly, of poor leadership here. I always love it when somebody says, oh, that's not my job, or it's not in my job description. I mean, that's just not a good example to set.
I think Hollow Janeway should be giving him some advice here.
Yeah, a little teamwork advice.
You're right.
Dal is still very sensitive in the scene to being an augment. And he still calls himself a failed genetic experiment. And he says, not that any of you care.
I feel that maybe Rok or Gwyn could have done more to try and cheer him up or make him feel like he's part of the team. He did seem a little sort of in the dumps about this.
Yeah, at the same time, I think they've all got troubled stories.
Yeah.
And his story doesn't really seem that bad. We talked last week about how it seems like a gross mischaracterization to say he's a failed experiment. He seems like a wildly successful experiment.
Right.
But she does point out that from her point of view, it's worse because her father is actually the one hunting her down. And Dal does concede in that moment that maybe Gwen has his sob story beat.
Yes, your father is a time-traveling supremacist psychopath who emotionally manipulated you for your entire life.
Oh, and don't forget, you're an exact clone of him.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of baggage with that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, Zero now reads Rok's mind, which I thought was kind of rude.
Yeah.
Revealing that she has a backstory of how she ended up on Tars Lamor that she is ashamed about. She doesn't want to tell the story, but Gwyn very touchingly tells her, "You can tell us," and we go into a flashback.
I do think they ought to have a conversation with Zero about the appropriateness of just reading people's minds, especially your friends' minds.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Rok was basically in a show where she would play a monster and a hero with a sword would defeat her in combat. But it was all an act. It was a stage play, and she got fed, and she liked the company of the hero, even though they couldn't actually communicate.
I think they've shown us a couple of times that Rok-Tahk just has simple needs. She appreciates food and just having a friend, somebody around her that she feels like she can trust.
Yes. Well, the show was wildly popular and even had fans, one of which was a Caitian, which
Yeah.
I think we've sadly been lacking Caitians in this half of the series.
Yeah, really, this was the first time. And in this scene, I think the best part of the whole thing is when the Caitian hisses.
Oh, yes. It's frightened of Rok.
Yeah, it's very cute.
Oh, yeah. A totally gorgeous blue Caitian as well. Very cute.
Yeah.
Well, Rok finally gets fed up with playing the villain and has just had enough. The crowd watching this show starts laughing, and she humiliates the hero of the show by not letting him win, and she ends up sitting on him.
We do see this crowd, which isn't very big. We see that it contains some Klingons.
Yeah, it's a niche audience.
I would think that Klingons would be calling for blood.
That's true.
Yeah.
They like a fight, but yeah, they are a little bit bloodthirsty on the whole.
Yeah, this is more like wrestling that is just here for the show.
Right. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Well, after this show, it looks like the owner, not the guy who plays the hero, sold her to the Kazon, who are supplying prisoners to the Diviner. Because, as she says, people didn't want to see a monster be the hero.
I don't know about that.
They come back to the present, and Gwyn says to Rok-Tahk, "So that's why you don't like fighting." Rok, being upbeat as ever, says, "But if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have met you."
Oh,
She is quite adorable.
yeah, she definitely is. She's always so upbeat.
Right.
I was a little disappointed in this backstory
Yeah.
because we didn't really dig into her origins. Like, how did she get into that position? It felt a little bit like how a child would tell their backstory.
Yeah.
Because the story itself of how she was part of some fake fighting ring and people were paying money and cheering, that alone is a little bit juvenile and not necessarily something that you would quite believe. But there wasn't any depth to it.
Yeah. I think you're right, though. I think if you were looking at it through a child's eyes, this is what they remembered.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a good point, but I think it fits for Rok. But it does ask the question of where did Rok come from? Does she remember? Does she know?
Yeah, maybe she doesn't, but hopefully we'll get a little bit more about the origin of her origin
Yeah.
story.
Further origins, deeper origins.
Yeah. Well, now Zero suggests that they get back to work, but when Z tries to pick something up off the floor, their arm just falls off. So while Jankom is fixing it, Dal asks, how did a Medusan end up in the Delta Quadrant? And now Zero's backstory begins.
Yep.
And Zero explains how the Medusans left their planet long ago to explore, and we see a ship on the surface of a world with the Medusans in their energy form sort of floating around exploring the planet.
Yeah.
When the other Medusans return to the ship, Zero continues to explore and runs right into a party of Kazon.
Wearing the Spock visors, notice.
Yes, with the red Spock visors on. And they chase Zero, and as the other Medusans get on their ship and leave, they manage to stun Zero and capture them. And then they lock Zero into what sort of looks like a casket.
Yeah.
And then we see the Kazon delivering that casket to Drednok, who, by the way, in that scene is in full robes.
Oh, yeah, he's in his Darth Drednok mode. Something that happens later makes me wonder, when did Drednok pick up wearing robes? I'm wondering if he watched A New Hope and went, hey, that's my kind of style. I like those robes, man.
Maybe he saw a fashion show and was like, oh yeah, I look good in a robe.
I look good in robes. Give me a cape. Now, the question I have here is, did they leave Zero behind? Were they running up that ramp? Well, however Medusans run. Or did they just leave? Were they just on the way to leaving and forgot that Zero was there?
Yeah,
I wasn't sure about that.
yeah, definitely rude to leave one of your own behind. It does kind of appear that they were running away from the
Yeah.
Kazon and just left Z behind to make most of them be able to get away.
Zero was the involuntary sacrifice.
It was a little suspicious to me because couldn't they sense the minds of the Kazon that were all around them?
Ah, okay, I have a reason for this. The Kazon are pretty mindless.
Oh, Too dumb to have thoughts? You might be onto something.
That might be a stretch, but that is a good point.
Because you think all of them.
Yeah, the whole group of the Medusans.
Detected them.
Right.
Yeah, and if they're really part of a hive mind, they should have been communicating about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the scene where they deliver the casket to Drednok, Gwendala is also there. And she puts her hand on the casket and she looks a little bit shocked. And then when we move back to the present, she tells Zero that she's sorry. She had no idea.
I just think Gwendala, seeing as she's made this change in her life, would be absolutely racked by guilt of all the things she did for her father.
Yeah, I think she's trying to make up for that now. And I think now she sees how it was actually harming the others. I guess she's doing her best to make up for it.
That's true. Well, now we get a great animated shot of the Dauntless in space, and the Diviner telling Ensign
Tahani,
I thought my daughter and I were the only Vanokat left. Non-Tahani says, you don't remember what they did. Drednok is obviously the smart one here, because he says, the Medusan has shattered his mind.
Yeah, but not that much. An ongoing complaint that I have is that the Medusan is supposed to drive the person mad, but somehow, in a couple of episodes, this guy's back to normal.
Temporary amnesia. The Diviner says, Starfleet, they saved me. And Not Tahani tells him, they destroyed our world. And he asks her, help me remember. We now go into a really in-depth backstory. This is kind of how the Diviner explained to Gwen what happened to Solum, but it's a lot more in-depth, and it's from this character's point of view as well, which I think is great. She tells him that there was a time that you were enticed by Starfleet lies. Why would we join a primitive allegiance when they had the most to gain?
She is still a little bit bitter.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting piece of information that the Diviner was pro-Federation when they first met the Starfleet ship.
She gives that impression, yeah. She continues, years of infighting rotted our decency, replacing it with fear, anger, and civil war. And they're showing these great still shots of Solum during their war. We see lots of Drednoks and phaser fire. Continuing, she says the Federation refused to take a side, abandoning them to face decades of our own self-annihilation. Hope of Solum was dead. Ow. That's the Prime Directive for you.
Yeah.
Decades later, the sky tore open and hope returned. And we see the Protostar in these still images. The Diviner says, I remember seeing the Protostar arrive through the wormhole. They called it an accident, but we knew it was fate.
His voice is starting to go back to being the old Diviner at this point. Yeah.
Okay, that was some great voice acting. The way he's going back to that very dramatic style that the Diviner was using.
Lies and hypocrisy.
Exactly.
Now we go to the Protostar and we see Chakotay calling, Mayday, Mayday. The Protostar has been heavily damaged as we pass through a temporal anomaly.
Temporal anomalies are never good.
Never. On the bridge, Chakotay and the crew try to fight off multiple Drednoks, but end up being taken prisoner. The Vanokat weaponize the Protostar with their last surviving living construct to be sent back in time to destroy Starfleet before they could ever make first contact. But then when the ship was about to go back, Chakotay escaped and sent it back through the anomaly without a crew. Their salvation lost in the past.
Oh, this was great. We saw lots of Drednoks here, a very young Diviner.
Oh, yeah, he's good looking.
And some other characters, too. We see some guy in the background with, like, this cool headgear and robes.
Yeah.
And lots more of those Scorpion-style Enforcer bug things from Tars Lamor.
Yeah, absolutely. And the scene where Chakotay and the bird dude, his first officer, escape, and they send the Protostar back, they show him doing it sort of on an iPad. Like he's able to control it remotely, probably using Janeway the hologram. And what's funny about that scene is Chakotay's just got this like little grin on his face as he manages to make that happen.
Nice little touch there.
Yeah, like, ha ha.
Well, the Diviner's memory is returning and he continues the story. They formed the Order, sending 100 of their ships, each with one soldier and one Drednok, through the wormhole to find the Protostar. He became the Diviner and she became the Vindicator.
And it was their last 100 ships, too.
Yes. In the wormhole, we see lots of their ships being destroyed. Ensign Tahani, also known as the Vindicator, says, none of us would know where we would end up. And Drednok tells the Diviner, We arrived in the Delta Quadrant 3 years ago. The diviner then says he had been searching for the ship for 20 years.
I didn't think they were super clear that all of those ships were destroyed. I mean, they said that only a couple of them had gotten through, but we didn't really see the ships blowing up. We kind of see them getting zapped by electrical impulses or something, but they also could have been spread out into different timelines.
Right. We only saw these sort of final two at the end, but I guess this was kind of the point. They were showing it from the perspective of these two.
Yeah.
In theory, you're right. There could be 98 other ships in other parts of the timeline.
There could still be more. Yeah, and they made a point here of something that I think we're supposed to know, and they've told us a few times, but they really clarified here that the diviner ended up at a point in the timeline that was 20 years ago, and he's been searching for the Protostar for 20 years. But Ensign Tahani, the so-called Vindicator, she landed just 3 years ago, and she joined Starfleet. She made a conscious decision to become this fake ensign and become attached to someone who was as weirdly interested in finding the Protostar as she was, but for very different reasons.
The Vindicator says, you defied the order and made a progeny because you had to make sure the mission was completed. But why did she betray us? And the diviner replies, she met a boy.
I didn't feel great about this answer. Maybe because it sort of diminishes the choices that Gwen has made. But also it's that sort of silly thing of, oh, gee, she met a boy, so she left home or whatever. I don't know. It didn't feel like a great answer. And I'm not sure it really felt like something that the diviner would say.
Do you think he's just covering here? The fact is that she made a choice about the morality of the situation. She realized that what he was doing was wrong. She developed a conscience.
Well, maybe, but...
And he's making an excuse because, like she said, he broke the rules of the order.
Well, maybe, but I guess they're certainly going to feel like what they're doing at this point is completely in the right. So they do need to make an excuse. It's not that she was seeing that the morals were wrong. It was that, oh, she met some cute boy and her head was turned.
Yeah.
It couldn't have possibly been for any other reason because clearly our mission is the most righteous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
All right.
10 out of 10 for a freaking cool name.
The Vindicator?
The Vindicator. And also, I love the images of the guy with the headgear, the other robes who were standing next to them.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to call him the Hatter. I hope we get to see him again.
Yeah, I hope we do get to see him again. So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
So the Vaunakot got into a fight because they couldn't decide if they should join the Federation. And this somehow caused a civil war, which they're completely blaming on Starfleet, even though Starfleet really didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, let's remember, they were confident in their supremacy.
Yeah.
And Starfleet rotted their decency. I think these people have other problems.
Yeah, I think they do. It was just so funny. It was like I had maybe missed that detail when it was explained the first time by the diviner, and this time it was so obvious. It was like, oh, they got into a fight because they couldn't agree with each other. It tore themselves apart, and they're blaming somebody else.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I think we'll find that there were issues with Vaunakot society.
I think so.
And of course, it was everybody else's fault.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Other than, I assume, the ruling class.
Yeah, right. We go back to the Protostar, and they've managed to fix the ship, but the system still needs a reboot before they can charge the Protostar. While they wait, Jankom starts to tell his story. There's a part here where when Gwen is talking about Jankom, she says something like, well, you are the most miserable of the lot. What the hell does that mean?
Jankom could have replied, well, tell us your backstory, Gwen. You're the most evil of the lot.
Yeah, totally. I thought that was rude.
How many crimes against humanity did you commit?
Yeah. Well, Jankom tells the story that on pre-Federation Teller Prime, orphans would be used for deep space missions. And now we see a Tellarite sleeper ship getting hit by an asteroid, causing atmosphere to vent. And this leads to Jankom Pog's cryo chamber to be accidentally opened. Then we meet an automated robot which keeps asking him to state his full name and query. And we learn why Jankom keeps having to state his name when he speaks. We get a montage of all the things going wrong on the Tellarite ship and Jankom having to sort of learn how to fix everything.
Even though he says he's just a trainee engineer.
Yeah, he keeps saying, Jankom Pog can fix it.
And we get the first use of percussive maintenance.
Oh, yeah, as he hits one of the panels. Well, after all the work that Jankom does, the robot finds that the oxygen levels on the ship are depleted, and the other crew in the cryo chambers wouldn't survive. So he decides to sacrifice himself in an escape pod so that everybody else can survive. And when he gets out into space, he's almost immediately captured by a Kazon ship. And then Zero says, all those Tellarites will never know of your noble act.
Especially seeing as the robot, forgets his name immediately.
Oh, yeah. Right away, the robot has already forgotten, even though he says Jankom Pog will fix it 1,000 times.
Well, I like the way Gwyn here says, royalty if you ask me. And Rok, again, being all heart, hugs Jankom, and Murph joins in.
Yeah.
After all of this, Dal says, I guess we all have a past. And Gwyn replies, and together we have a brighter future. Why isn't Gwyn the captain? She's smarter, seems to have more empathy, has way less propensity for being pouty. I mean, there's the unethical stuff she did in her background, but she seems to be a good captain material.
Well, Dal called dibs.
Oh, good point.
No, he called dibs and he took the captain's quarters, and Janeway registered him as captain, and he's captain.
Holo Janeway appears and informs them that the Protostar is now ready to charge. They go to engineering, and Rocktop powers up the Protostar. The crew then asks Holo Janeway who she was before she became a hologram, and she asks them, have I ever told you about Molly? She was the runt of the litter, but we don't find out any more about Janeway's dog as we cut back to the Dauntless.
And we know that's her dog's name from Voyager.
Yes.
Yeah, back on the Dauntless, Janeway is reading a profile of the crew and summarizing, kidnapped, sold, traded. They're not criminals. They're just some kids who found themselves in way over their heads. Commander Tysus asks, perhaps it's not them we should be after, but who put this bounty out?
Thank you. That would be my first question.
And Janeway finds that it was put out by someone called the Diviner, and Tysus remarks, a serious name for a serious individual.
Wait till they hear about the Vindicator.
Oh my gosh.
And the Hatter.
Yeah, don't forget the Hatter. Tysus has the coolest voice.
Oh, yeah.
Janeway then goes to see their guest, who is in Ensign Tahani's quarters.
Not Tahani.
And when she walks in, she sees Drednok and the Vindicator in their full glory. And she kind of gasps and she's like, what is this? But the Diviner comes up behind her and karate chops her in the neck, knocking her out. And the Vindicator's like, what are you doing? And the Diviner replies, ensuring the mission. He is now back to his full Diviner voice.
Yes.
Lies and hypocrisy.
Exactly.
And we end on an unconscious Janeway on the floor.
Wow.
I do not like to see Janeway on the floor. So let's start by talking about what stood out in this episode.
Man, did they ever cram a lot into a single episode?
Yeah, definitely a lot in this episode. I would agree.
Well, we pointed out already, the Diviner coming back to his sinister voice.
Yeah, it was sort of funny because he had that almost innocent voice at the beginning, but by the end, he was in full voice.
Yes, wonderful. Yep. So, the Vindicator's Drednok has clearly not yet developed a liking of cloaks.
Yeah, he looks actually quite naked.
Yeah, I'm surprised the Diviner didn't ask, so why is your Drednok naked then?
Oh my god, that would have been so funny. What's with your Drednok? You know, Jankom Pog's story started out by saying pre-Federation time.
Yes.
Which would make him, 200 years old?
Oh, yeah. By this point in time, the Federation has been around for 200 years. He would be ancient in real terms.
That was interesting. And it was also kind of a bummer. I mean, where were all those Tellarites going, or where did they end up? Will he ever find out?
And if it's traveling at sub-light speeds or close to light speeds, it could be decades, if not another 100 years before it reaches its destination.
Oh, wow.
The great use of music has returned. And I loved the storyboard style with those still images of the fall of Solum.
No, that was super cool.
Oh, that was really well done. It really built nicely on of what the Diviner had told Gwen. And this, I thought, added some great depth to the story, and I just loved the visual style. That really worked so well for me.
Yeah, I agree. That was great. And the Diviner was super good looking. Only 20 years ago. He had hair.
I mean, the Vindicator, despite being, probably the incarnation of extraterrestrial evil, is pretty good looking.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me is it certainly seemed like the Rock Talk flashback story was the weakest of the flashbacks. It really just told where she had been right before she ended up on Tars Lamora. It wasn't very informative. We didn't really learn where she was actually from. And it just seemed like such a silly, childish story. I was disappointed that we started there because that sort of gave me what is with this episode kind of feeling. But then it improved quite a bit from there.
I think that's because Rok is the childlike character.
Yeah.
This is her childlike perspective on things.
The hero in her story did look like he had a Bajoran nose, but he wasn't wearing an earring.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about that character.
Somebody really needs to do something about the Kazon.
Oh, yeah, geez.
Like perhaps disabling or destroying their ships when you run across them. Force them to stay on their homeworld. I think the old school Orions would even consider these people jerks. They really do seem to be a problem.
Yeah, I suppose they get away with it, though, because they are picking up orphans and young people that nobody cares about. The unwanted, as they're called on the show.
So they're human traffickers at the end of the day.
They are human traffickers.
Yeah, need to deal with that, Starfleet.
Yeah. They're quite menacing here. There were times, certainly on Voyager, where they looked absolutely ridiculous with their hair.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they're a little scarier here.
This might be jumping show a little, but I always felt on Voyager, they came really close to being a menacing enemy. Really close, but they never quite pulled it off.
Yeah, they're much more menacing here.
Right.
I think the last thing that stood out to me in this episode is that I guess Chakotay is stuck in the future.
Oh, wow. That's true. He would be.
Yeah.
Huh.
How are they ever going to get him back? I mean, I think we talked about this before. I'm okay with that, but Janeway's not going to find him.
How far ahead do you think this is then?
Yeah, that we don't know yet.
So there is an open question of how many years into the future this is.
Yep. Anything else stand out for you?
I think that was it.
All right, then let's move on to character development. And there's a lot of character stories here, but what did we learn?
Well, I think this week made up for the fact that Zero and Jankom were pretty much not in last week's episode.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely true. And we certainly learn a lot about Jankom in his flashback, like why he speaks in the third person all the time, which he's done since the beginning. And also how he became so good at fixing so many different things.
Right.
He was forced to learn a lot of things on the fly.
Yeah, he's even a good plumber.
Well, I think that was the one thing he couldn't do, right, was fix the toilet.
I didn't think he wanted to, but he ended up having to with the plunger.
Oh, I see. We also get a chance here to see Jankom's selfless act to save the others on the ship.
He has the best backstory in terms of Star Trek because he does something completely selflessly to save his crewmates.
He absolutely does, and he does it really without thinking about it. Nobody has to suggest it to him. It's his idea.
Yeah.
And he manages to do it, this selfless thing, and all the while maintain his salty attitude because he is yelling at that robot right up until the end when he gets in the escape pod.
Right. I kind of like this character because he's almost like the old salty sea dog. The hand on the ship who knows everything about the ship but still has this grumpy attitude.
Yes.
But he'll do anything for the ship. I think he's the only one who really does have the truly noble backstory.
Oh, I totally agree. One thing we learn about Zero is that there may be a little bit of a free spirit, and they had more curiosity than some of the other Medusans.
Yeah, that got him to trouble.
But also must surely feel abandoned by the other Medusans in that moment.
Yeah, especially if they really did just run away and leave him behind.
Yeah.
Maybe that was actually deliberate because he was a little bit too much of a free spirit in the hive.
Maybe.
And they're working on the principle of, well, there's one less problem to worry about.
Oh.
It was deliberate.
Yeah. Well, we learn a little bit about Ensign Tahani, now called the Vindicator, and that she still has quite a chip on her shoulder about what happened on Solum, which I just repeat again, they did it to themselves.
I just think it was fascinating that she brought up that the Diviner was tempted by the Federation and Starfleet. Yeah. And then that line about rotted our decency.
Yes.
I really want to know more about the structure of their society.
That story was considerably more interesting when told from another person's perspective than it was the first time we heard it. She is a very interesting character.
Oh, yeah. I've got to agree.
I wonder if what will happen here, and obviously we don't know, are they telling us that the Diviner was sort of pro-Federation for a reason? Are they looking to or planning to give him sort of like a redemption arc. Briefly here, he is talking about Starfleet as helping him. Are they going to find a way to actually turn him back into a hero?
Oh.
Could be interesting. Long way to go from here, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah. Well, maybe the Diviner and the Vindicator and the Hatter, maybe their part of society was highly privileged. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the Federation threatened that, which led to them behaving in this way.
I guess, yeah.
The portion of society that didn't live the idyllic life rebelled, and that's what led to the war.
What a bunch of Sorry.
I'm going to have to bleep that, you realize.
These guys are a pain.
A chip on their shoulder is the only way to describe it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that wraps up character development, so let's move on to how this episode works as a kid's show and talk to Mahi, our 7-year-old correspondent.
Hi, Mahi. What did you think about this episode?
I think it was a good episode. Lots of good things happened. Wise Admiral Janeway knows that the Protostar crew are not thieves, but kids trying to escape. She knows Ascensia's real form, and also that she and the Diviner are up to something. Back in the Protostar, Del Rey is not whining about himself anymore. Every member of the crew has a past and backstory that they are trying to get over, just like Del Rey.
Which of the flashback stories did you like most, and why?
I like Jankom Pog's story the most. He was so determined to do all the work he was required as the robot Boxy kept telling him things as they were failing. He finally sacrificed himself and left his ship so that his shipmates could use the air left to breathe. He got trapped soon after and had to work in the Diviner's mine. We now know why he keeps using his name to refer himself while talking.
Do you think the Diviner will go back to his evil ways?
I think the Diviner will go back to his evil ways. Thanks to Ascensia, he now remembers everything about his future and Solum. He will surely try to destroy Starfleet and the Federation so they can make first contact with the people of Solum. He will try to protect his own people, but I don't think he will succeed. The Protostar crew and Captain Janeway will surely stop him.
Was there a lesson in this episode?
Yes, there were a few lessons. Everyone has a backstory and a past, some happy and some sad. Their past experience is the reason why someone is the way they are. Knowing this, we could understand someone better. Teamwork is dreamwork. The crew of Protostar was able to repair the ship as they worked together while learning about each other.
Thank you, Mahi.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for your update, Mahi. Insightful as ever.
Well, we heard Mahi's perspective on what she learned from this episode, but of course, I have my own idea of what the lesson was.
Okay, Kim, go for it.
Knock before you enter someone else's quarters. I mean, Janeway, she just opened the door, was shocked, got knocked out.
And ran into a naked Drednok.
Oh, man. Yeah, you gotta knock. All right, let's move on to feedback. We do have a couple of pieces of feedback this week. I'll let you start with Cal E.
This is a very obscure one. Cal E writes, it appeared that the deflector on the Tellarite ship had also failed. The robot did not mention that.
You know, what a great point. That's how the whole thing started.
That is truly a Star Trek geek thing to notice in that scene.
Absolutely. On the Facebook group, Wes Huntington wrote, finally, Prodigy took the time to breathe and actually give us background information on the characters. Too bad Chakotay is stuck in the future. I wonder when Admiral Janeway will figure that out.
That's Vice Admiral Janeway.
Vice Admiral Janeway, Wes, come on. Although, why isn't she a full admiral? That's lame.
Yeah, especially if Admiral's stuffed shirt is a full admiral.
Yeah, optics matter, especially when you've got a show that is tailored to kids. And we had this discussion a couple times about Janeway, the woman, being accused of being too emotional to make good decisions, which that is such an old trope. We need to get over that, stop spreading that. And spreading that in a kid's show is really frustrating. And then now we also wonder, why is she Vice Admiral? Why is the woman the Vice Admiral and not a full Admiral? I'm not even sure I remember anybody else having the title of Vice Admiral. So I don't get it.
And let's point out that she pretty much disabled the Borg for a generation.
Yeah, come on. This is ridiculous. Now, this title is not Prodigy's fault, but I feel like they could fix it.
Right.
Okay, let's go to our one piece of audio feedback from our normal feedback giver, Jeff X-Force 11.
Hello, Star Trek fans. It's Jeff X-Force 11, leaving my feedback about Prodigy Preludes. This was really cool. I really appreciated getting to see each of our characters' backstory and to get a fuller tale of the diviners coming into this timeline. And I appreciated it because while it was the standard length of episode, it gave us so much insight into the characters and makes us appreciate each one of them more. And so I really liked that. I really appreciated Jankom's backstory a whole lot to get the story of why he is who he is, particularly out of all of them, because I think we have seen some of him, but not as much as some of the others. And so I really appreciated it. All right, those are my thoughts. X-Force is out.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the Jankom story was the best one for sure.
Yeah, definitely on the same page with Jeff there.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Jeff. Let's now move on to the Star Trekkiness of this episode.
Well, first thing I have is the Kazon capturing Zero, wearing the Spock visors from
Oh, yeah.
Is There No Truth in Beauty, the original series episode.
We really laughed when we saw those visors. And just to recap, if you haven't seen that episode, it is not good. It is not good.
No, did not age well.
No.
The next thing is, I think they followed that Star Trek theme that whatever your background, you can be your own person and better yourself.
Yeah.
Your history or your race's history shouldn't hold you back.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point and very Star Trek-y. I also feel like the villains are Star Trek-y. This sort of repeating concept that the bad guy believes that their race is somehow superior to any other race in the Federation, that they're smarter, or that they're the natural dominant race of the quadrant. I mean, how many times have we seen that?
Yes, the Cardassians and their, quote, natural xenophobia.
Yes, exactly. And it's certainly something Khan said many times.
Well, his is superior.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the individual backstories and learning more about the characters, and sort of how they ended up here, that's a Trek thing, but it's also just a TV thing.
The temporal anomaly. What is more Trekky than a temporal anomaly that throws you somewhere in time?
Yeah, definitely. How about any Star Warsiness of this episode? The one thing I saw was the hero story in Rok's flashback had a sword that was a little bit like a lightsaber because you could turn it off.
I was thinking about Final Fantasy series. It looked like the sword from that.
Oh, okay, sure.
In Zero's flashback, we saw Darth Drednok in his full Sith robes.
That's true. There was something sort of silly about the Rok Talk flashback that reminded me of maybe an Ewok story or something.
Oh, harsh.
Or like when somebody would kidnap Chewbacca's race or something. I don't know. The whole thing was not for me.
You really didn't like the Rok one.
I did
That's
not.
Funny.
I did not. And I love Rok Talk, but I didn't like that flashback.
I thought it was fitting for Rok.
It was too silly to think that we're still doing like medieval time stories in the future and that anybody would pay to watch a fake fight. I don't know. You just go on the holodeck.
Maybe that's a problem with the Delta Quadrant. It's
maybe.
kind of, entertainment there is pretty bad.
But it would have made more sense if they were betting on who would win and if sometimes the hero did lose. And then again, it might have just been the view of the story through Rok Talk's childish eyes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just didn't buy it.
I'm just going to go with entertainment in the Delta Quadrant is really bad.
Apparently so.
If somebody brought wrestling there, it would probably make a fortune.
I did absolutely love the Jankom Pog story, though. I thought that was really, really good.
Yeah.
Well, we wandered out of Star Wars a little bit, so maybe we need to move on to rating. What would you give Preludes out of 10?
Okay. Gotta go with a 10. Loved it.
I don't know. Why am I always surprised that you give everything a 10?
There was so much crammed into this one episode. I loved the images of Solum and that storyboard style that they were telling it in. seeing Jankom's background, that he really is a hero.
Yeah.
But all the others having this trail of events that led them here. And Rok still being very upbeat, even though she had this awful background and basically been sold. And even then, she still remains very positive. And Gwen becoming the person saying that they can move on to a better future.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed the episode. Thoroughly enjoyable. Again, they managing to keep this very high intensity and pace of the show that makes you coming back and going, okay, I want to see what happens next. It's really good.
Yeah, I like the ending. I really enjoyed the Jankom Pog story. I like the Zero story.
Yeah.
I definitely liked the storyboard part and the story of the Vindicator and Solom. I thought that was really good, and the use of music in that was really dramatic. All those things were good. I was very frustrated by Rok-Tahk's story. It just, to me, almost felt like it didn't fit. And I definitely felt, because they started with that story, I had a bad taste in my mouth going into the episode, but then I really liked the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
So there's no way I can give it a 10 with that one piece of the story I didn't like. But I think I would give it a 7.5.
Oh.
Because I liked so many of the other things.
Yeah.
I think if you lifted the Rok-Tahk story out, I might give it an 8.5.
Wow. That really just didn't sit well with you.
I didn't like it. But that's just me. All right. We have covered all our categories. Anything else to say about Preludes?
Nope. Just a good, solid episode that really does continue to hit the highs for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I guess we will wrap up. And before we do that, I want to let you know that James and I can always be reached at RebingeIt@gmail.com and also on Twitter and Instagram at RebingeIt.
And don't forget, you can listen to our Deep Space Nine podcast called ReBinge Deep Space Nine, available everywhere you get your podcasts, and on YouTube at RebingeIt.
To contact us for Prodigy and even be a part of the show if you'd like, you can join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts. You can also leave audio and written feedback at talkthroughmedia.com/feedback. Or you can just email us at RebingeIt@gmail.com, which is how most people get in touch with us. But there are lots of ways to get to us if you want to be part of the podcast.
That's it for this week. Come back next week to hear the ReBinge It crew take on a new episode of Star Trek Prodigy.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.
Oh, and listen to Janeway.
And don't be a Borg.